In this video, I'm going to be philosophizing on thankfulness as it pertains to distinctions within the overarching subcomponent personality characteristics, appreciativeness, and or optimistic moral judgment, and or frankness, each meaningful to engage certain meaningful feelings, not always aesthetic feelings, yet feelings that relate to various aesthetic experiences and or more prosociality within individuals who may be engaging in some cases in more altruistic feelings, yet is mostly drawing on compassionate thinking. And so thankfulness is a combination of compassionate thinking and or more compassionate feeling that engages certain aesthetic feelings combined with altruistic and or more complex prosociality in terms of one's direct perception navigations and or appraisals. It's most meaningful to engage more thanks and or more meaningful appreciative verbal and or nonverbal communications. Optimistic moral judgment, the opposite polarity being antisocial perception. And I'm going to get back to antisocial perception in a minute, yet I'm going to briefly define optimistic moral judgment. To not conflate optimistic moral judgment with the valorizations more unique to appreciations and appreciativeness, as optimistic moral judgments is more related to the moralizing of the intrinsic values one perceives and or meaningfulness. So not always related to value and more likely to be associated with certain moralistic perceptions and moralizing of certain situations that is oriented in a more optimistic direction, meaning that an individual whom is thankful and engaging in more of these optimistic moral judgments is engaging a perceiving and or judging of what's meaningful to the certain situations and or volitions and or conducts within those situations that appraise it to be meaningful and or therefore worthy of thanks. And it's this worth that is meaningful for shaping certain optimistic moral judgments, not pessimistic moral judgments that are more punitive, yet that are optimistic and more thankful. Compared to antisocial perception, that is more associated with perceptions of not always hostility, yet is more likely to engage conflict-seeking conducts from experiences that one may perceive more aggressive and or threatening misconducts in others who may be engaging more neutral and or ambiguous perception, action, and or behavior, meaning that individuals whom are higher in antisocial perception may be more likely to be antisocial from perceiving antisociality in even ambiguous situations and or volitions and or conducts that may be more inappropriate and whom are ultimately less thankful than the individuals whom are engaging in the opposite polarity, whom are engaging those optimistic moral judgments, whom are perceiving and or judging, not whom are merely perceiving, meaning that moralizing contains, for it to be most meaningful, some form of judgment. Compared to appreciativeness, again, engaging, perceiving, and or judgments whom are evaluating within certain deliberations that are more meaningfully deliberating and engaging a careful judging process within the appraisals of value, ultimately valorizing certain values related to certain perceptions of volition and or actions and or various conducts within various situations and or the situations themselves to be valuable to the self, whom is appreciative. Compared to the opposite polarity, inappreciativeness, whom are less likely to ever engage the appraisal of values and or engage valorizations, whom are more likely to avoid communications of what is valuable in another. Not necessarily the value one may derive superficially, who may be more extrinsically motivated to obtain certain consumables and or certain desired items that benefit the self, including money. One is more extrinsically motivated to, yet may in other situations backstab others, communicating even subsequent to being helped by those individuals, that those individuals are suckers and or losers and or whom are bad individuals themselves, not needing of thanks and or appreciation for the sacrifices those individuals had conducted in terms of being able to provide the values that they had provided, meaning that inappreciative individuals are less attentive and or appreciative of certain volitions and or conducts and or situations that the more appreciative individuals are, and whom are more likely to experience reciprocated prosociality and or who may experience more future-oriented benefits from engaging the appreciations of certain values appraised correctly, not inappropriately, meaning that the appraisals should be more objective, and the more objective the appraisals are of certain values, the more likely it is that one is to experience the same benefits, often from the same individuals and or others, from cultivating a reputation of being an individual whom is quite appreciative of certain values and whom is more likely to also be higher in thankfulness. And we tend to prefer to help individuals whom are more thankful and or appreciative, not individuals whom are more likely to backstab and or whom are more likely to not at all experience certain positive, meaningful emotions, whom may not care for the help we provide them, meaning that it's the individuals whom are more appreciative that whom reciprocate prosociality and or certain more meaningful verbal and or nonverbal communications are more likely to engage in the cultivation of more meaningful relationships sustained related to the benefactors whom are engaging in more moralistic and or altruistic conducts, engaging that compassionate thinking in terms of often identifying certain relevant and or appropriate and or meaningful essential and or necessitated underlying psychological needs, meaningful to optimize healthy psychological functioning within relationships, yet ultimately within the self, whom is more likely to experience certain optimisms and or positivities related to those certain essential and or necessitated underlying psychological needs that are being satisfied within the experiences of deprivations and or not, whom are also more likely to be more honest even in terms of communicating situations that they may experience certain attempts of the other to satisfy irrelevant and or inappropriate and or meaningless underlying psychological needs, yet who may communicate in situations this is inappropriate and or I don't quite need this, yet I can infer more rationally the moralistic good you may be attempting to conduct, in terms of whom are more compassionate, not necessarily within engaging compassionate thinking per se, yet compassionate recognition. And compassionate recognition is more related to identifying the attempts to satisfy certain unnecessary suffering that is mostly related to being higher in compassionate thinking oneself, whom can appreciate certain altruistic and or moralistic volitions and or conducts that are more likely to optimize healthy psychological functioning and or positive subjective well-being. Compared to frankness. The opposite polarity being condescendingness, that is more likely to engage certain direct, be it that one is more frank, communications appropriate to being able to appraise the true worth with blunt honesty and or lack of worthiness within certain volitions and or conducts and or situations. This is distinct from the other two component parts and or processes within thankfulness, yet is most meaningful for thankfulness. In order to experience more consistent situations, one is more likely to experience the positive, meaningful emotions, and or whom is thankful for the changes others may engage in terms of even negative feedback and providing more blunt honesty in terms of what the other had done wrong, and whom is thankful to experience the transformations in the individuals whom had committed to truly make the difference in what is more perceived to be valuable, in being direct in terms of more blunt communications to the issues, not quite to attack the individual, meaning that there's no ad hominem attack. It's quite more meaningfully engage in critical thinking to identify and or recognize within clear verbal and or nonverbal communications areas of dissatisfaction and or that are problematic for maintaining and or sustaining more healthy psychological functioning. Not always the relationship itself, as individuals who may be more frank may also experience certain dissatisfactions within situations that they may engage in various exchanges of value within the private market, who may be dissatisfied with a certain product that they may purchase, and who may complain of certain defects, and who may be more likely to be appreciative of the individuals whom help them and provide them with the more reasonable value within what's rational in terms of proportionate judging of what needs to be resolved in order to provide the individual what ultimately boosts one's satisfaction with the product, whom from engaging frankness is more likely to cultivate thankfulness within themselves. This is distinct from being sincere and or engaging honester communications, as sincerity is more related to authenticity and communicating verbally and or non-verbally what you may communicate in private and or think in private, compared to honesty that is more related to honester communications, not quite always sincere and or frank in terms of communicating certain values related to truth and being more honest to the truth and or thinking clearly and or valuing certain truth claims from the truths one holds within certain meaningful utterances of thought more translucently, not necessarily whom is engaging that translucence within the private and or public connections of one's communications, nor being more directed in terms of the bluntness of their honesty that's more likely to elicit certain feelings of thanks and or satisfaction within certain relationships. This means that there's more unique component parts and or processes to honester communications within openness to exploration that's unique to the situations, not necessarily that is related to areas of work ethic, yet the distinct personality characteristics tend to mutually engage the executive functioning that's current to future oriented, more likely to engage verbal reasoning in terms of providing those honester communications from engaging more appropriate risk and or benefits evaluated within the distinct situations to communicate more honestly what's needed in order to engage more meaningful dopaminergic reuptakes of the desired benefits one is desiring to obtain within the communications of more honester vocalizations of what one means and or what one needs within the certain situations in order to appropriately and or relevantly and or meaningfully satisfy certain essential and or necessitated underlying psychological needs, ultimately optimizing one's healthy psychological functioning and or positive subjective well-being. That's all I want to say for this video. Hope you have an awesome one. Keep moving this upstage.